Thank you very much, Senator. We appreciate your sponsoring this and speaking to us today. I'm Jim Sandman. I'm president of the Legal Services Corporation. To get our panel started, I'd like to set the stage by addressing three things. First, I'd like to explain what legal aid is. Second, I'd like to explain what the Legal Services Corporation, which is presenting this event, is. And third, I'll describe a few takeaways that we hope you'll be able to leave here with. First, what is legal aid? Legal aid is free legal assistance to low-income people in civil matters. What's a civil matter? A civil matter is a legal... Sorry about that. Please silence your phones. A civil legal matter is not a criminal matter. I know that's not helpful. A criminal matter is a prosecution brought by the government for violations of criminal laws. Every other legal proceeding is a civil matter. So, for example, evictions and foreclosures are civil matters. Child custody and child support cases are civil matters. Divorce is a civil matter. Breach of contract cases are civil matters. Most importantly, for today's purposes, when a victim of domestic violence needs an order of protection against an abuser, that's a civil matter, not a criminal matter. It's a private litigation between the abused and the abuser. That's contrasted with criminal enforcement of abuse laws that are brought by the government against the abuser. In a case like that, the abused is not a party. Here's why it makes a difference. As Senator Sullivan explained, in a criminal case against an abuser, the abuser has a right to a lawyer paid for by the government if the abuser can't afford to pay for one. That's a matter of the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution, but it applies only in criminal cases. In a civil case, where the abused is seeking a protection order against an abuser, if the abused cannot afford a lawyer, she has no right to one. She has two options under those circumstances. One is to, if she's income eligible, is to go to a local legal aid office and seek help from a legal aid lawyer. The income eligibility standard is typically very low. At legal aid programs funded by the Legal Services Corporation, the maximum income for an individual permitted in 2019 to qualify for legal aid is $15,613. For a family of four, it's $31,188. If you make more than that, you don't qualify. In addition, legal aid organizations don't have nearly the resources they need to meet the needs for their services. They do the best they can, but they have to turn a lot of people away. So if you can't get a legal aid lawyer, you're on your own. And you have to go into court and confront a legal system that was created by lawyers for lawyers and doesn't work very well if you don't have a lawyer. So that's what civil legal aid is. What's the Legal Services Corporation? The Legal Services Corporation was created by an act of Congress in 1974. We are the largest single funder of civil legal aid in the United States. We fund 132 independent legal aid programs with more than 840 offices serving every county and every state, the District of Columbia, and the territories. We get all of our money from an annual congressional appropriation, currently $415 million. What do we hope for you to take away today? First, we want you to get an understanding of the importance of having legal assistance in a civil domestic abuse case. We want you to understand the consequences of not having a lawyer and the benefits when you do. Second, we want to emphasize the importance of having legal aid lawyers collaborate with others, social services providers and others, and particularly with pro bono lawyers, that is, lawyers in private practice who volunteer their time to supplement the limited resources of legal aid programs. And we'll give you a specific example of that. And third, we want you to take away a personal story that you might remember that will illustrate the difference that having legal aid means to a survivor of abuse. I'll introduce our panel. To my immediate left is Nicole Nelson, who is the Executive Director of Alaska Legal Services. Alaska Legal Services is a statewide legal aid program serving all of Alaska through 12 offices and is funded by the Legal Services Corporation. To Nicole's left is Brenda Egan Johnson. She's given me permission to use her name here today. Brenda has a story to tell, a story of abuse and survival. To my right is Kate Shank, who is Deputy Director of LAF, the Legal Aid Foundation of Chicago, a legal aid program that's funded by the Legal Services Corporation and that serves Cook County, Illinois. And to Kate's right is Gary Wachtell, who is Senior Director for Law at Discover Financial Services in Cook County. They partner with each other on a program. So I'll start by asking Nicole to tell us how a victim of domestic violence accesses help. How do you get to a legal aid organization if you do? What are the barriers? What happens when you don't? And if you do get to a legal aid organization, what services are available to you?
Sure. So by way of background, again, as Senator Sullivan mentioned, I'm from Alaska. And so our state is enormous, 2.5 times the size of Texas, and most of our communities are not road connected. We also experience rates of domestic violence that are epidemic. So there was a 2015 study that showed about 1 in every 2 women, experience domestic violence. So this issue is really personal in our communities, and it's really a community problem that requires a community solution. And one thing I just want to say before I move on to how you get to legal aid, I want to thank Senator Sullivan for being a really loud voice and a champion on that issue. For him to have said consistently since he was the Attorney General of our state, really that this requires all hands on deck to solve this problem. It is not just the province of women or domestic violence shelters. So again, in our state, to get to a legal aid offices, we have 12 different offices throughout our state, and we try to operate with a no wrong door policy. So you can walk into our office, you can fax if that works for you, email, phone line, and we try to be available to serve victims of domestic violence and survivors of domestic violence at the time when they're ready. We want to be available when they have both the opportunity and the time is right for them to leave the relationship. But unfortunately, legal services organizations like ours operate on sort of a shoestring budget, and that's a hard ask of us to be available 24 hours a day. And so we don't have the capacity to do that, but what we can do is partner with our dear friends and allies at our domestic violence shelters, with healthcare providers, and also with other social service organizations to embed our services within those organizations that are also serving survivors of domestic violence and who are our strong, strong allies in this fight. When you get to our door, by any means that you can, we take applications, make sure that people are eligible for services. And one thing that you should know when we're talking about serving survivors of domestic violence, oftentimes the part of the cycle of control and abuse is also limiting access to financial resources for the person who's being abused. And we take that into account when we're factoring in what resources are available for the person to obtain an attorney. So in addition to in our community, there are huge, enormous barriers to folks getting to our door. But once they're there, we try to help as best we can. We can provide services that range the full gambit of things that might stabilize somebody's life and present them with a reasonable alternative to the current life that they're living. And these may be something like a short-term domestic violence protective order, a long-term domestic violence protective order. They may need help with housing. Oftentimes, we have families coming to us who have experienced domestic violence, and they're out of the relationship, and they're out of the home, but then they go to try to find housing, and because they've applied for a protective order, maybe the landlord doesn't want to rent to them. And so, again, that's a legal issue that requires a legal solution that we can help with. Oftentimes, too, folks are experiencing harassment at their jobs, so they may have, and again, that is something that we can help with by getting a protective order that prevents the abuser from going around the workplace or making contact, unwarranted contact. And then also, we can help with custody orders and making sure, in my experience, the folks who are experiencing domestic violence, one of their number one priorities, if there are children in the household, is making sure that they don't lose access to their kids, and also that their children are safe if they are in a visitation situation. And that's something that lawyers can do. Again, in our state, there are really enormous barriers to getting access to assistance of any resources that are related to distance and geography. And that are unique to our state. But I would want to say that I think that I have not talked to another colleague in the lower 48 or anywhere else that has not shared that their clients face similar challenges in accessing legal aid. So a couple of other things that are difficult for those trying to escape abusive situations. One of the dynamics of domestic violence is the isolation, is a pattern of trying to isolate the person who's being abused from information and resources. And so making sure that you're available in a place and a time when that person is able to maybe have the privacy that they need and the right accurate information they need about what the law provides and what the law will protect against. Another barrier is really developing a trust relationship with the person who's experiencing domestic violence. Oftentimes, I mean, nobody wants to talk about their family life. Everybody's family life is really messy, and it is particularly difficult to tell all of that to a stranger, and particularly difficult to tell that to a stranger in court, to a judge. And especially, I think that's especially so when people in your life who are supposed to be in that trusted relationship when intimate personal violence occurs, when they have used those personal details of your life and weaponized them very effectively against you to maintain control for a long period of time. So those are the enormous barriers that people face when they are seeking to get the legal help that they need. But the upside to that is we have studies that I'm aware of, at least 15 years worth of studies that show lawyers make a difference in this case, in domestic violence. And these studies consistently show over the last 15 years that when a survivor of domestic violence is connected with an attorney who can help stabilize the life and help them tell their story, it makes a difference. And so that's something I'm very proud of, that lawyers can make a difference and legal aid does. But, I would say the most enormous barrier that individuals face when they're trying to get access to legal help is really the scarcity of the resource. Unfortunately, those of us who provide legal aid, we have to turn people away because we don't have the resources to serve them. And it's about one person for everyone we serve. And we are turning them away not because their cases lack merit, and really we're turning them away not because there aren't really compelling, life-altering, life-impacting needs at stake. We have to turn them away because we just don't have the resources to help. And that's a travesty. It really is. And I really hope that we as a community can do better than that. And so, and I've told this before, but a 3 times a year in our community and on the local news, a domestic violence murder makes the first front page of the news. And every single time that goes through my head, the first thought is, I hope it's not somebody we had to turn away, because that would just be heartbreaking. So again, those are the barriers. That's what we can do. We know it works. And
Thank you, Nicole. One of the things that can be done to provide more resources is for legal aid organizations to partner with pro bono lawyers, lawyers who have full-time practices doing something else, but volunteer their time to help out. And we have a great example of a very successful collaboration that Kate Shank will introduce. Kate, as I mentioned, is Deputy Director of the Legal Aid Foundation of Chicago. And they've created an on-site help center in a courthouse that provides meaningful assistance to folks who would otherwise be completely on their own. Kate, can you describe how the help center works?
Thank you, Jim. So as Jim mentioned earlier, LAF, thanks, is the LSC-supported organization that serves Cook County. And our office is located in downtown Chicago, and that's where most of the private councils are located too. But we serve all of Cook County, and our service area can range distances up to an hour or more away. So courthouses that are an hour or more away from where our attorneys and where most of the private bar is located. And we try to involve the private bar wherever we can. But it's challenging, especially when we're adding not only work on top of work that the private bar is already doing, but then asking them to tack on an hour-plus commute to serve clients. But one of the ways that we've been able to expand our resources, really reach clients at the far edges of our service area and engage the private bar, is our Rolling Meadows Domestic Violence Courthouse-based help desk. And Rolling Meadows is a suburb that's in the far northern reaches of Cook County. So we started project planning for this help desk in early 2016, and it came about because of some developed relationships that we already had, along with just great timing. So we've had a very long-standing relationship with the law firm of DLA Piper, which is a national and international law firm. And I was talking with Annie Garrity-Helms, who is their director of pro bono services, and she was looking for ways to try to engage the corporations, the businesses that were located in the northern suburbs, and pull in their legal departments into pro bono work. And she contacted me to say, what needs does LAF have, and how could we engage these councils to help meet those needs? That very same day, one of our attorneys at LAF was at a stakeholders meeting at the Rolling Meadows Courthouse. And she was meeting with the judges there, and she was meeting with a domestic violence advocacy group that's located at the courthouse that serves survivors of domestic violence. And that advocacy group is at the courthouse every day, but they're not always available to serve people who are walking in with emergencies. They have meetings, they have other things that take them away from serving people who come in. And so the judges were lamenting that there were days that the advocates weren't available and survivors were coming into the courtroom needing protection and having no clue how to present their case. They were having to fill out the voluminous paperwork on their own. I mean, we're talking 10 plus pages of paperwork just to get an order of protection. They had no idea how to tell their story so that the judge could actually make a proper ruling. And the judges were concerned, and rightfully so, that they were being forced essentially to potentially deny meritorious requests for protection because the person who was there had no idea how to actually show that they were entitled to that protection under the law. So the judge reached out to us for help and said, how can LAF help meet this need? So that is how we created the Rolling Meadows Domestic Violence Help Desk. It was out of these conversations. And what the help desk looks like is we have partnered with corporations that are located near the courthouse. So there's a number of them that are up there. And what they do is they come to the courthouse on the days that the domestic violence advocates aren't available. They are there in the help desk. They help anyone who's coming in with an emergency who is needing protection that day. They help walk them through how to fill out the forms. They talk with them about how to present their case to the judge so that the judge can give them the safety and the protection that they desire and that they're entitled to get. So this desk could not happen without the support of LSC. It's funded through LSC. It couldn't happen without the support of the private bar that is located close to the courthouse, and without the support of the judiciary who asked for it and is incredibly grateful that we're there, and the collaboration with the domestic violence advocacy program that's located on site. So we started training volunteer attorneys the summer of 2016. We've done trainings ever since, and we staffed our first help desk that fall. That help desk has been ongoing ever since. We're serving about 2 to 4 half days a month, so when there's gaps, that's when we're there. and it's fully staffed by volunteer attorneys. So Gary Wachtel and his personally, and then his team at Discover really helped in the foundation of the creation of the desk and really have taken the lead on staffing it. The volunteers who are there are supported by attorneys at LAF. So what happens is if a volunteer attorney goes into the desk, has a question that isn't identified in the manual or they're not sure what to do, they know who to call. There's always somebody on duty at LAF. They call us, and our attorneys help walk them through, what's the proper advice, what's the proper support to give to the survivor. And we are working on expanding the number of days. We're doing actually another training at another corporation next week. So we're expanding our pool of volunteers. It is a walk-in desk. So some days are quiet, some days are really busy because we're serving what the emergency need is on any given day. But we're working every day to guarantee that when someone comes into that courthouse that they don't have to face the judge alone. These are already people who have experienced immediate trauma, are immediately afraid for their safety. They're scared, they're confused, they're overwhelmed because going into a courtroom is overwhelming if you're not there on a regular basis. It can be even for lawyers that aren't practicing there every day, let alone someone who is an abuse survivor. And so we're making sure that they don't have to go through all of that on their own. We've been just thrilled with the level of support from the corporations, Discover and others that are located nearby. We've been working with 6 different corporations. We've engaged 57 volunteers since we started and more, even in the last week, of course, it's going up, and have served 89 clients, and that's continuing to increase as well.
Thank you, Kate. How do you spread the word about the availability of the help desk? The person who needs help often doesn't know where to go. They may not even know that there's something called a protective order, an order of protection, whatever it's called in your local jurisdiction. So if you're located at the courthouse, you're going to be dealing with a population that self-identified their problem as legal and knew to go to the courthouse.
Right.
But there have to be lots of people who never get through those first 2 steps. How do you get the word out to them?
It's definitely challenging. So at LAF, we have a separate unit called our Community Engagement Unit, and part of what their role is to make sure that community members and community organizations are aware that we exist, aware of what legal aid does, and understand that our services are free, and that we serve people. We make sure that no matter what someone's income is, that they have access to a lawyer when they need them. So it is part educating people about what's going on with their life, that is a legal issue to begin with. A lot of people don't necessarily recognize that, and then understanding that we are the resource, the primary resource for them to contact.
Thank you. Gary, can you describe how this arrangement works from your end?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you work in a corporate legal department at
Absolutely.
Discover, a financial services firm. Domestic abuse cases have nothing to do with what you and your colleagues do in the practice of law day to day. But here you are at a help desk in a busy courthouse, taking on these kinds of cases as volunteers. How does that work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is not our forte, let's say. What I would say is at Discover Card, I would say volunteerism is in our DNA. It's part of one of our core values of our company. And I helped build about 6 years ago our pro bono program in the legal department, sort of based on that. Lawyers have an ethical obligation to do pro bono, which I believe Jim or the senator mentioned earlier in the conversation. It also helps us attract and retain talent. It helps us develop our young lawyers. So there's a variety of reasons why we do pro bono at all. Why do we do this? This opportunity is a bite-sized, recurring opportunity that lets us have immediate impact and help somebody in their time of need right away. We're seeing survivors come in, and they're facing an existential threat, as I think Nicole mentioned. And so helping them in that moment is extremely rewarding. It's one of the most rewarding things I think my lawyers do. What I would say is for corporate lawyers to get involved in projects like this, I look at it as a 3-legged stool, and the 3 legs are the opportunity needs to be bite-sized, you need the right geography, and you need training. And what I mean by that is a lot of the lawyers, as Jim pointed out in my company, we do have certainly some litigators, but a lot of them are corporate lawyers or finance lawyers or other things, and they do transactional work. So walking into a courtroom is not necessarily their forte, and they don't want to maybe take on extended representation. So a bite-sized where you show up, you can have an impact, and then you go back to your job, and it helps everybody out, including the legal services organization and the victims, is amazing. Geography. We are in, as Kate mentioned, the northern suburbs of Chicago, so we're not right downtown where a lot of the court activity is and a lot of the lawyers are essentially located. However, there are needs out in the suburbs, and I found over time that private lawyers are more likely to go and volunteer at something that's close and quick, right? We have families, have to get home for kids, busy schedules, et cetera. So I found that having something close in proximity is important. And then probably most importantly is training, and that's the support that LAF provided us. They put together a fabulous training module. They sent a couple of lawyers out over time to train us in person on the law that we would need to know for this, the issues that come up, how to help a victim, how to tell their story. And so for those reasons, we love doing this. We do a lot of things. This is one of our most sort of, I would say, impactful and favorite items that we do. And I would just lastly just stress that the way I see this in terms of funding is I don't think, we would certainly do some things without legal service organizations, but it's a lot easier for us to deploy our resources when there's something that's sort of pre-built and we can be trained on. So leveraging the resources into the private sector, I don't think would happen as often if they weren't funded.
Gary, your last point is a very important one. When we lobby for funding for the Legal Services Corporation on Capitol Hill, we're sometimes met with the question, well, if legal aid organizations aren't able to meet the need, why can't you fill the gap by using pro bono lawyers? There are lots of lawyers across the United States. And I think your explanation is the lawyers in private practice, whether they're in law firms or solo practitioners or in corporate legal departments, can't do this on their own. They need to partner with a legal aid organization that has the infrastructure and the ability to identify the clients and provide the training and the mentoring that you need if you're not going to commit malpractice.
Yes.
Is that,
That's,
not to put words in your mouth.
I couldn't have said it better myself, John. No, but that's right.
So you not only helped set up this program, you do this work yourself.
Yeah,
Can you say something about what that's been like for you?
bless you. Yeah, it is probably the most rewarding thing I do as a lawyer. When I was in law school, one of my professors, he was a old-time Baker McKenzie partner, he told me specifically, and he told us in class, but me specifically, that being a lawyer comes with a great responsibility. And you have to be able to give back to your community. It's in the ethical code, and it's one of the most important things you can do. Doing this, going and sitting there for a 4 or 5 hour shift and having somebody, like I said, that's in an existential crisis come in and being able to actually help them and make a difference in their life right away is using my degree for probably the most good that it can be used.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brenda, you've lived this. You've experienced abuse, and you've seen the difference that lawyers can make. Can you tell what the experience has been and what your conclusions are about the value of legal aid in helping people who've experienced what you have?
Yes. Okay. I do not like to talk about this, but I do talk about it whenever I feel like it can make a difference in helping other people. So I'm here to tell you about the impact that Neighborhood Legal Service Association had on my life and how they enable their clients to live better lives by providing free, superior legal aid to those who need legal help the most but can't afford it. I was a college graduate living in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, in western Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh. I had my master's degree from George Washington University. I held 3 teaching certifications and came from a very close middle-class family. I was a special education teacher for several years here in Fairfax, Virginia. But right before my twins were born, my husband and I moved back to my hometown in Pennsylvania. I became a stay-at-home mom by choice and planned to go back to work when the twins were in elementary school. When they were 4 years old, I left my ex-husband and took the children with me because he was physically abusive. An immediate protection from abuse order was issued against my husband, and divorce proceedings began. He had supervised visits with the twins for a period of time, and then the protection from abuse order ended. For 6 years, my ex-husband represented himself pro se for the majority of our divorce and custody proceedings. He constantly took me into motions court for unfounded contempt charges on an almost weekly basis. During the weekly court-mandated visits that my twins had with their father, he would continue the physical abuse. My attorney for those 6 years had been referred to me as being the best attorney in town at $275 per hour. I then ran out of money, and my children continued to visit their father on a regular scheduled visits. I had been caught in the cycle of abuse that I was able to completely free myself from through divorce, but my children were not free, and I couldn't protect them. I had spent all of my savings trying to keep my ex-husband from continuing to hurt them during his visitations. Over the years, my first attorney represented me, and yet even with the physical abuse occurring, my ex-husband still was seen by the court as a father who wanted to see his children. Time after time, the judge would brush off the claims, including pictures of abuse. Repeatedly, following court hearings, the twins would ask me, why did the judge ask us those questions and then not believe us? And I didn't have any answers. I wrote my attorney at the time a check in the amount of $7,000, which was all I had left in my savings account. I was completely out of money. My ex-husband was still fighting me for custody, and nothing had been resolved, and he was still physically and mentally abusing the twins. My attorney at the time said, just start documenting every bruise with pictures and create a paper trail, because maybe then the judge will pay attention. Going to court isn't working. And I was totally out of money, so I did. For a year, I just took pictures of all the bruises. After one weekend visitation, my daughter came home with a black handprint bruise on both of her arms, showing the outline of every finger. I went straight to the state police with all of my pictures from the past year because I didn't know where else to go, and I couldn't take it any longer. The detective brought in Children and Youth Services, who pursued child abuse charges. I was then told to go to the crisis shelter. I went, and an advocate at the crisis shelter listened to what occurred and told me that since I had no attorney and was out of money, I should contact Neighborhood Legal Services because they could help represent people with low or no income. I never thought that I would use any social service in my life, including something as important as legal aid. When the lives of my children, who were my entire life, were at stake, that was the last thing that I wanted, was a free attorney. Because how could a free attorney be any good? Well, that free attorney from Neighborhood Legal Services Association completely saved our lives. After years of being told by the court it's not bad enough or it's just his parenting style, I arrived in Mark Krochka's Neighborhood Legal Service office questioning what abuse even was at that point. Are the black and blue handprint bruises on my daughter's arms really abuse? Is pouring dish detergent down her throat for talking back really abuse? Is getting kicked in the stomach for telling the custody evaluator that his dad was mean to him abuse? Is getting thrown up against a wall and getting hit because my daughter cried when her dad refused to take her to her cheerleading practice on his time? Was that abuse? My ex told my 6-year-old daughter that there was no such thing as Santa Claus on Christmas morning during his holiday visit that we split right before I arrived to pick them up. She insisted there was, so he slapped her across her face, leaving a red welt that lasted most of Christmas Day. Is that abuse? The courts didn't think so. Who had I become? As a mother, how could I even question what this was? The court and legal system made me question this, because until that point, it was never bad enough for them to do anything. Until I arrived in attorney Mark Krochka's office at Neighborhood Legal Services, and I vividly remember him saying, "You are in a cycle of abuse. This is abuse. This needs to end, and I'm going to end it." Attorney Mark Krochka listened, and he believed not only me, but my children, who were 9 years old at the time. He was passionate. He would not stop in court until every detail was understood by everyone in that courtroom. He spent evenings and weekend hours at our house listening and working to ensure he had all of the bases covered. He refused to walk on eggshells as my previous attorney had done. Mr. Krochka was not afraid to upset the judge for fear of hurting one of his future cases. And he did not care what the other attorney thought of him. He only cared about the protection of my children who were too young to protect themselves. With the help of attorney Mark Krochka from Neighborhood Legal Services, an immediate protection from abuse order was issued against my ex-husband for 3 years with supervised visits that were supervised by the sheriff's office. Attorney Krochka pulled together all of the different entities, the social services that were needed to support the case, the state police detectives, the child and youth services caseworker, and the crisis shelter. It was over because finally someone believed us. In a separate proceeding, a prior pending Superior Court custody appeal that my ex-husband had filed was thrown out on my behalf when Attorney Krochka sent the Superior Court a letter stating that there was now a new PFA, Protection from Abuse Order, in place. My previous attorney had told me that I couldn't tell the Superior Court because the PFA was a separate matter. It wasn't a separate matter. The Superior Court did care that there was a PFA, and it did impact my ex-husband's custody appeal, and it was a miracle. Now we could resume a normal life after all of those years in turmoil. Following our return to normalcy, I then served as director on the board and executive board of that local crisis shelter who helped me years before. I served for 4 years. I was hired in 2007 to develop and direct a statewide brain injury school consulting program in Pennsylvania. I've done this for the past 12 years. A year ago, this program that I direct in Pennsylvania for children was recognized by the Centers for Disease Control as a national model for brain injury school consulting. Because Attorney Krochka helped us, I'm now able to spend my life helping other people. And most importantly, my now 21-year-old twins are thriving, so they're 10 years post all of this. My son was the valedictorian of his senior high school class. He attends the University of Pittsburgh and is applying to dental school this summer. My daughter was homecoming queen her senior year, and she attends Westminster College. I sent Mark Krochka a picture of my twins on their first day of 11th grade that year that we reconnected, 8 years after he had met them. And Mark said, "They look so grown up now, not the scared kids as I remembered them." And he's right. They were no longer the scared 9-year-old kids he met, who at that young age had lost trust in adults to protect them. They were saved by a legal aid attorney who used everything in his power to make sure they were safe, and he would not stop until they were. And for that, my children and I owe Mark Krochka, Neighborhood Legal Services, and Legal Service Corporation our lives, because we were able to get back on our feet, and now we are able to function as citizens and give back. So thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you, Brenda. Your willingness to share your story is incredibly powerful. It's what motivates others to try to provide help to others of the kind that you received. So you see the difference that having legal assistance makes. Put together what Nicole said at the beginning with what Brenda just said. Nicole talked about the number of people they have to turn away. Brenda talked about what happens when you get a lawyer like Mark to take on your case and the case of your children. From where I stand, it's all a matter of funding. We need more money. The Legal Services Corporation has a pending request to Congress to increase our funding from $415 million to $593 million. You see what we do with it. It'd be to provide more help to more people like Brenda. Our panelists are happy to answer questions. This is a kind of a complicated matter. If anybody would like us to elaborate on anything, or yes.
Hi, Senator Moran's office. I'm an intern, and this is a question that any of the panelists can answer. Do you guys have any quantitative data or statistics for what your legal aid provides? How do I word this? So, there's kind of a spectrum of results you can get from getting a positive issue order for protection, or you get custody cases. Is there any data that says if one of your pro bono lawyers get involved if the results are going to be kind of more extreme in the positive sense, or if it's going to be like the lower end of convictions, or am I wording that in a way that you guys are clear? Okay, yeah, is there any data on that?
Sure. So one thing I can tell you, and this is just at my program, and one area I guess it was in 2012, we had some resources from a private foundation that allowed us to do a study, an economic benefit study of the work that we did on behalf of our legal aid as a whole. But one piece of that showed that in just the time when we were looking at 1 year, it was 1 year, and the number of survivors of domestic violence who were successful in getting an order of protection against abuse, that the cost savings were $2.7 million through that 1 year of work. And again, although we're a really large state, we have a very small population. So again, that was a 5-to-1 return on all funds invested in the program. So I have that. I don't know if somebody's got better information.
Kate, do you have?
Yeah, I think the information that Nicole presented is basically true across the country, that the studies have shown that there is between a 1 to 5 ratio in terms of a return on investment is what has been seen nationally. So on our work, we know that in 2018, we recovered $31.5 million in terms of either benefits to our clients or in preserved assets or reduced debt. And that's looking at only the financial piece of what we do. We can't quantify exactly, right, what the support is if you achieve an order of protection. That is, as Jim mentioned earlier, or John had mentioned earlier, 8 million lost days of work. So that's one figure, but the dollar amount that we brought in doesn't even take that level into account. That's even the $31.5 million that we brought in is what we know from each individual case, and that's just a snapshot for 1 year, let alone if you preserve somebody's house, that lasts for years and years to come. If you preserve their job, that's years ongoing. So we know it's a tremendous return on the investment.
When a person seeks help from a legal aid organization and the resources are available to assist them, there is a range of service that might be provided depending on the circumstances and what the availability of a particular lawyer is. Those options can include an order of protection. There are likely to be child custody issues. There may be a divorce, supervised visitation. So it's a web of legal issues. Sometimes legal aid will be able to help with some of those issues, but not all because of limited resources. But each case is different.
And one other study that I would mention, in 2004, there was a Farmer Teffenholler study, which I really appreciate this study because it not only showed that legal aid lawyers and domestic violence make a difference because we are able to help with someone's long-term stability, but it also showed that there was a protective effect by just having a legal aid lawyer who can help with domestic violence within a community, that had an impact in and of itself in reducing the violence in the community.
So if I can just add on one piece, and it's not directly related to domestic violence work, but it does speak to the general value that legal services has. So we looked at our housing work. So we're keeping families from homelessness. We are preventing evictions for families who are living in subsidized or otherwise supportive housing. And we looked at what that cost us to keep a family from homelessness. And what we determined is that to save a family's home cost us the equivalent of $1,300. And that is not saving someone's home for 1 month. That is saving the home of families and kids potentially forever. Because those families that are in the subsidized and supportive housing are entitled to stay there so long as they comply with the rent and other, lease obligations. So that is an incredible return. It is hard to house a family anywhere in this country for $1,300 for a month, let alone for years on end. So that's just one way that we were specifically able to see what the value, the real dollar impact value is of our work in that area.
Other questions? thank you all for coming. I hope you found this informative. Would you please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists?